Quartets 2 is a beautiful combination of strings and synthesizers. Did you start with the idea of a complex sonic palette, or did that naturally evolve when recording and mixing?
I think when I started writing it, I wrote two sort of batches of works, one pure string quartets EP called Quartets 1, and with Quartets 2 I wanted to start introducing synthesizers, and I think just by the nature of knowing where I was going to record it, so we recorded it here in the hall downstairs at Air Studios, which is a huge kind of 3.5 second reverb old church, amazing kind of beautiful dusty sounding room. And when you write music for a certain space and with certain players in mind and certain instruments, I think you do react differently and you respond differently. I don't think I set out to make a complex set of sounds, but I think when you start down a certain path, it's a bit like those books when you're a child. You start reading, it says, if you want the protagonist to go down the dungeon, turn to page 93, and if you want them to go to the ice cream shop, turn to page 7. And you're given all these choices and think, well, go to the dungeon, or I'll go to the ice cream shop, or whatever. And I think that kind of thing, you just follow your nose, you follow your ear, and you get a whole load of happy accidents. One of the things that really happened when we were recording, which was by design, but it happened far more than I was sort of expecting, was when we pumped all the synths live into the room with the string quartet, so that it wasn't just dealing with analog synthesizers. They became kind of acoustic synthesizers. So they were then responding to the room, and the quartet, the players, were responding to the sounds of the synths. But beyond that, the level of noise coming out of these old synthesizers through these huge speakers in the middle of the room kicked off unbelievable overtones in the quartet's instruments. And in Drone, the final track on the EP, we sort of decided to really play to that, and so down-tuned all the strings on the instruments. And you get this unbelievable wash of sound, which sounds like it's double, triple, quadruple tracked, but it's actually just the sympathetic vibrations of the instruments going in the room, and using a combination of really close mics and mics up in the galleries and all over the place. Yeah.
That's great, yeah. Is there a specific inspiration behind each piece or the whole project?
Unfortunately, there's no kind of story. It's not about anything, and it's something I've always struggled with explaining. But it was far more about that sort of follow your nose idea, starting with a very simple melody or a simple harmony, and just trying to work through it until it's completed. And just wanting to write music I wanted to hear played in a big room by players I love.
All the pieces are quite unique. What was your aim with this when you started?
I think I wanted to showcase what you can do. As a cellist, I often play on other people's works, and often cello parts are, the cello is often relegated to the low note, the kind of the Pachelbel's canon cello line, and oftentimes the synthesizers are relegated to doing the same, or everything kind of falls into a stereotype in the orchestration. And I just wanted to try writing music that didn't just follow those formulas, and obviously there are parts where the cello's playing the lowest note of the chord, or the synthesizer is doing that. But in the opening track, for example, there's this kind of unusual fluty arpeggio thing going, and that's actually, it's just a sort of exposing a kind of character flaw in the Juno, where if you hold down 3 notes, it does a certain kind of pattern. If you hold down 4, it does something else. If you hold down 5, it does it again differently. And so you can sort of stretch or compress time, although it's still at the same tempo. It adds in these weird little pauses, so it'll go like to try and justify the space that it's allocating. But yeah, that, those sorts of quirks I wanted to bring out, or flipping the viola and the violins, or flipping the cello and the violins, or whatever it would be, just to try and push things around and move things from where they should sit, in the kind of natural order of things. But I think fundamentally I just wanted to write I'd come off writing a computer game score, which was all very dark and about 12 and a half hours of music. And so I just wanted to write something that was not that, and that was just written to be performed. So there's really no editing and nothing added afterwards. It was just committed takes. And as I say, we put all the synthesizers in the room through big speakers. I was sitting in the control room, mashing away at the keyboard, and they were then reamped at the same time as the quartet, so that you get this kind of new instrument emerging of like an augmented string quartet.
What was your workflow when writing these pieces? Do you start with paper, or do you take a more electronic approach?
My handwriting is so bad that writing to paper is just a no-go. I went direct to actually Dorico, the new Steinberg notation software, which I had bought but was in the middle of delivering other things, so had never had a chance to really use. And so I wrote them straight into Dorico and used it as a kind of learning experience. Audio was recorded into Cubase, and then everything was just delivered. It was my friend Joe Rubel who was engineering and mixing, so I just delivered stems for the synths, or we lugged this downstairs and plugged it in. Some of the bass lines and the things that we could pre-record, and then reamp we did, and so then that was obviously just done through Pro Tools. A lot of people start with paper, and there's that wonderful Marilyn Monroe quote, I think in ink, and all those things. I do not think in ink, because I'll never remember it if I start it.
Both Quartets 1 and 2 have beautiful, simple artwork. Is there a story behind it?
The idea behind the artwork for Quartets 1 and 2 was originally there were going to be 4 EPs, and the pieces were going to be divided up into basically singles. And there are 4 voices in a string quartet, and I thought there's a nice analogy, or a nice similarity there with print, where you've got CYMK, the 4 colours in printing. And so I went up to Cass Arts up the road and bought 4 little tubs of oil paint and 4 little canvases, so cyan, yellow, magenta, and black. The K in CYMK, it turns out, stands for key. It's black. And I bought a pair of latex gloves. I bought 4 pairs of latex gloves. Well, two pairs, I guess. I got 4 gloves. And put big dollops on each of these canvases and just smudged them across with my fingers. Did it a couple of times, and took a photograph of it. But I think just the simplicity of it, and the kind of tactile nature of it. I always felt with vinyl, for example, or even a CD, whatever, the kind of physical nature of it is part of the attraction of the thing. You open the box, you take it out, and everything makes a good noise, and vinyl feels good, and the paper feels heavy, and people run their hands over those things, and you can't really do that with a download or a stream. And so I've always wanted to see how you could achieve that kind of tactile thing, and so I thought, having kind of lumpy looking artwork might be I always love going to the portrait gallery and seeing the paintings there, because you just want to touch them, and so I thought that would be a thing to do. And my artistic ability doesn't extend to anything more complex than smudging some paint across a page.
Oh no, but absolutely beautiful anyway. What are the differences between Quartets 1 and 2?
Very simplistically, Quartets 1, it's all acoustic instruments, just the string quartet, and Quartets 2 has synthesizers. In terms of writing style, I think probably Quartets 2 is darker. It's a little less. I think Quartets 1 has more kind of moments of levity. It's a little less introspective, maybe, even in the opening track of Quartets 2, which is it's quite fast, metrically fast. Or it's metrically fast, but harmonically quite slow, and it's got a very patient, dynamic build. But even when it gets loud, it's not like a release. You know, it kind of still feels like it's a bit closed. But what I've so enjoyed with both Quartets 1 and 2, just with this whole project really, was not playing on it. So not with any of my other albums or most of my other work, I've been playing the cello on it. And so these I purposefully wrote for other people to play, and thought that was a really kind of important part of the process, that I wasn't going to be able to fix it. You know, like if I wrote something and then changed my mind, you know, I wanted to write it so that although I was at the recording sessions, I didn't want to have to say, oh yeah, of course I meant that to be a B flat, or, you know, where you can always just quickly change things or fudge it a bit. I thought, it's got to be clear, and just as a writing process, it was a lot more structured, or a lot stricter, I think, because I knew I was writing it for Richard Harwood, or, you know, the violins, Warren Zelinsky or Magda Filipczek, and I knew, you know, I know and love their playing, and wanted to sort of focus on that, and Laurie, my wife, was the viola player on it, and yeah, so I just wanted to sort of focus on their playing, and rather than, I think, worrying too much about how I would play it, or, you know, in Quartets 1 there's a fast movement called Sequence 3, which has a kind of fairly virtuosic cello line, which I gleefully passed over for Richard to play. Or there's some big shifts in the cello parts, which and Richard's just a phenomenal player, and you know, he and I often play on sessions together, and he does these huge kind of soloistic shifts like no one else. And so I thought, well, if I know I'm off the hook, I can do this.
That brings us nicely to our next question. Do you prefer playing or composing, and why?
The worst answer I could possibly give to that would be, I'm in a very fortunate position that I don't have to have a one or the other. I love doing both. I started playing the cello when I was 4, and you know, it's such a part of everything that I do. Even the majority of my writing is largely string-led, and you know, I'm not a particularly competent pianist. I can functionally get around a keyboard, but I don't write in those sorts of block chords, you know, so I'm still writing as if I were to be playing it. I'm also very fortunate, I think, that most of the playing that I do is with other composers, and you know, I think that's just it's a really sort of refreshing and kind of vital thing, that you get to, you know, argue whether something is the right note or the better way to play it. And you know, I think being able to divorce, although you can never really turn off your player brain when you're writing, or your writing brain when you're playing, I think it's a very good discipline to be able to sit and just, you know, oh well, this is what this person's written, I'm just going to sit and play it. And in the same way, just sit and write something without the concern of, technically, will this be comfortable? You know, there's a time and a place for reconsidering those things. But yeah, so I think the spoiled brat answer would be, I don't prefer either of them. I think both feed into the other, and so much of the music that's written today is written for, you know, machines to play back. And although I do write direct to the machine, I think it's, you know, so many composers are performers. Especially now, there's a real trend of, you know, people writing and playing, or going on tour and showcasing their own work. And I think it's a really refreshing, you know, it gets you out of the studio, gets you out of the box, and it does change how you approach even something as important, but something as seemingly subtle as phrasing. Just thinking, well, it's got to breathe. The computer doesn't need to breathe, but we physically do. So you do think, oh, well, that phrase is going to end here. You can't just keep going forever. So I think both in equal measure.
Who are your favourite composers and why?
I mean, top of the tree would be Benjamin Britten, I think. He wrote these 3 cello suites, which still to this day, I think as time goes on, our technical facility on the instrument increases. The Britten cello suites are still right at the kind of pinnacle of technical achievement as a cellist. Like, they're so difficult to play well. And there are far harder, running around pieces, but they're so elegant and so perfectly written for the instrument. I think he had such a command over every instrument and the ability to really write music that really connected with people right across the spectrum. From his War Requiem, I don't know if you know it, it's so kind of haunting. He wrote a cello symphony, which is a brilliantly kind of specific, it's effectively a cello concerto, but it's called a cello symphony. It's just the structure and the kind of the tone of it is that. But right to the other end, where he had a small song in I think it was an opera of his, which then Jeff Buckley took and made very famous, the Corpus Christi Carol. He did this arrangement of it into his A Boy Is Born, I think it's called. About a Boy is the film, isn't it? So yeah. Anyway, and it's this just haunting arrangement. Same sort of token, someone like Duruflé, French composer, did a wonderful, just a beautiful vocal writing, and he also did a very haunting arrangement of an ancient plain chant called Ubi Caritas, which I remember singing as a little boy treble. And Thomas Tallis, I think there are a lot of vocal composers. Yeah, Tallis, Britten, Duruflé. At the more kind of alive end of the spectrum, Steve Reich, I love the kind of the elegance of what he does. I think Johan Johansson's aesthetic is just incredible. That kind of electronic to acoustic ratio is just perfect. And Tom Adès, love Tom Adès. He has this string quartet called Arcadia, which is just, it's not actually a violin concerto, which is incredible. So many pieces which are amazing. Yeah, actually there's also an amazing Icelandic composer called Daniel Bjarnason, who's really blowing up at the moment, and he wrote a fabulous cello piece called Bow to String a number of years ago, which I played around the place with him for a while, and it's just incredible. It's so kind of energetic and bright and colourful, and then suddenly dark, and it's just brilliant. I think he's wonderful, and I think he's just done an opera which I think it was in Denmark or somewhere, but yeah, he's definitely the sort of the one to watch in my humble opinion. And then, the top 40. So
2017 has been a busy year for you. What's on the horizon for 2018?
Bit more of the same. I've got some film things coming up. Hopefully this computer game that I've been scoring for the last bit will come out. I've got a couple more dance pieces to do. I think one hopefully in the first quarter. Yeah, I mean it's, I think it's a lot of wait and see moments. A nice mixture of things.